On today's show, the Dallas Mavericks made the correct pivot away from Derrick Jones Jr. in NBA free agency. But is their next move the right one? On today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
Mavericks, NBA champions. Bang! It's good, and the Mavericks have won the game.
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
Loyalty never fades away.
And welcome. You are locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and NBA channel manager for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for being part of the show, making Locked On Mavs your first listen today. With the best way you can help us grow the shows to listen every day. Leave a 5-star review on any podcast platform, like the video, and comment anything below. Let me know in the comment section, what was your reaction to the Mavs getting Naji Marshall? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, sports stop sporting like we all want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And joining me from 105.3 The Fan, the consummate professional. What you got for me, Reggie Adetula?
I went to YouTube and typed in Naji Marshall highlights, thinking no one would be sick enough to do this. Shout out to the New Orleans Pelicans, rather, for doing that themselves, because they also knew nobody would be sick enough to do that. Thank you very much for your service.
How many views did the Naji Marshall best plays of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, hundreds?
I was not smart. I was not smart enough to look at that portion of it. What I did look at was that it was only 5 minutes long, and I was like, good job editing. I'm certain that would have been a 20-minute long video and that it was just the Pelicans editing down to 5 minutes. Only the best.
We'll talk about Naji Marshall. We'll talk about what he brings to the Dallas Mavericks. We'll talk about what a signing that is. It's a good signing to me. We'll talk about why that is. We'll also talk about Klay Thompson. The Mavericks are still in talks with Klay Thompson. We're recording this at 10:51 Central Time Sunday night. And so we are banking on the fact that it sounds like Klay isn't going to make a decision tonight. And so we'll see if that ends up being the case. But we got to start here, Reg. The Mavs made a pivot. All day we were hearing that the Dallas Mavericks were making Derrick Jones Jr. the priority. They really wanted Derrick Jones Jr. to come back. They had a plan that even if they got Klay Thompson, they would be able to keep Derrick Jones Jr. Nico Harrison, in the last public comments he made, said that Derrick Jones Jr. was priority 1A and 1B. And then all of a sudden we get this report from friend of the show, Tim Cato. Ooh. And this report from The Athletic says that Derrick Jones Jr. switching agents to Clutch Sports. Remember we talked about that a couple days ago and kind of made all the LeBron jokes and all the Lakers jokes and all the Rich Paul jokes and all that kind of stuff. Switched agents, and that all of a sudden affected a rule in the NBA according to the Players Association. You have a 15-day waiting period to negotiate after you change agents. So he wouldn't be able to negotiate with the Mavericks until July 11th. And so that really, Tim Cato reported, cast some doubt on Derrick Jones Jr. being able to return because it was going to be complicated in order to get him to return. And then, Mark Stein comes out with the report and is like, the Mavs still intend on signing Derrick Jones Jr. They still are making him a priority, all that kind of stuff. And a couple other reporters did the same thing. And then it comes out that actually was a big reason why the Mavericks went and got Naji Marshall. They signed Naji Marshall 3 years, $27 million. They bring him away from the Pelicans. Tim McMahon says they used a big chunk of their mid-level exception, which we thought that they were going to use on Derrick Jones Jr. And Mark Stein reports that Dallas pivoted to signing Naji Marshall after unexpectedly conceding tonight that is likely they would not have the wherewithal to retain Derrick Jones Jr. while the Mavs focus on the sign and trade of pursuit of Klay Thompson continues. And then he credits Tim Cato and says, hey, he was correct for illuminating earlier today that Jones' agent switch, which comes with a 15-day waiting period according to the Players Association rules, could affect the Mavericks' attempts to retain the high-flying defensive specialist. It turned out switching agents, trying to have it all, and doing that affected this Dallas Mavericks plan. And so the Mavs look at that and they say, all right, well, they were already connected to Naji Marshall before. There were already reports that they were interested in him. And they decided to go with Naji Marshall and just say, hey, we don't want to miss out. And we don't want to wait on Derrick Jones Jr. and figure out all this stuff. And let's just get somebody now that we know for sure that can bring a lot of what Derrick Jones Jr. can bring. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But your thoughts on the pivot, on making that move that the Mavericks did to just go, all right, we got to get somebody in here because we can't just sit around and wait for Derrick Jones Jr., this agent thing, to figure itself out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the idea that I did not anticipate that there would be as much negotiation necessary with the Derrick Jones Jr. Contract to begin with, because I think that factors in a little bit. If you feel like we have the framework of this deal, I think that makes it maybe a little bit easier. And maybe ultimately that is what happened. And it really was just the timing. And I think the timing does matter a good amount, because one of the things that somebody reminded me of, I don't even remember who, during the course of this, I'm sure like you're getting texts from all sorts of different people and kind of bouncing ideas off of like-minded folks. The Tim Hardaway Jr. deal to Detroit that would bring back Quentin Grimes, I understand that it's reported that is something that they have in place. It's not been made official, right? That's still open. And I think that is for good reason, right? The salary cap ramifications of everything for the Mavericks, it is threading a needle, right? Like they have to hit certain benchmarks at certain times to make all of this fit together in a very delicate puzzle. And so I think that that's still open for a reason. The more and more real possibility of Klay Thompson then adds a level of pressure and timing, and to the point where, can you allow the loose screw in all of this, for lack of a good metaphor, to be Derrick Jones Jr. deciding to switch agents, when I don't think Derrick Jones Jr. clearly matters, and I know that he's been set up as 1A, 1B priority for these Mavericks, but is that something that you would allow to derail possibly upgrading your roster in a situation where you felt like you came up a little bit short and you could make yourself significantly better, right? And I think that that's ultimately where you got to. And depending on what the negotiations were, you might have gotten a better deal, giving yourself a little bit more of that MLE to work with for Naji Marshall, who honestly more consistent of a 3-point shooter, right? Like, and look, I like Derrick Jones Jr. a lot. He fit very well. There was a level of chemistry that you already have that I think that sometimes we neglect when we talk about new additions. Sometimes we treat these like pawns as opposed to humans. However, if you wanted to get to this place, and I understand bringing it up at this point when it looks like Derrick Jones Jr. might not come back, might seem advantageous or like opportunistic, and I don't mean it to be that way, but there is an argument, if you did not necessarily like Derrick Jones Jr. as much as Naji Marshall, to go, that was probably the best season that we've seen from Derrick Jones Jr. in his career.
Absolutely.
Is he likely to replicate that? Is a question worth asking. When you go over to Naji Marshall, if you go and look at his basketball reference, the shooting percentages, which I imagine is the large part of what you get him, particularly corner 3-pointers, those types of things, even above the break threes are kind of nice. Those are stabilized. Those you've seen over a period of time. You're consistent in that. And so, like, I think all of those things work together where you get to a place where you go, this might be a move. And salute, honestly. I think Lauren Gunn made this point, that salute to this organization for making a quick move, because in years past, this is an organization that has gone into free agency with buckets and buckets of money, looking to give it to someone, and they got locked in on some person, and then days and weeks later, they're left. I don't know if I should use that particular illustration, but they're left with just a bag of money and no one to give it to, right? And so, like, I think that this is a different organization. This is a different front office, in that they're like, hey, look, we cannot jeopardize what we have on the table just because of what we had, the ideas that we had coming in. So salute to them for that.
Shams Charania just reported that Derrick Jones Jr. plans to sign a 3-year, $30 million with the Los Angeles Clippers. Literally just happened as we were recording this. So he signs that deal, and so now he's going to the Clippers. So the Mavs made the right pivot, which is just strange, because he could have got that money with the Mavericks, but the Mavericks just decided to pivot on it and decide that they wanted to bring in Naji Marshall instead.
Similar money, right?
A little,
and it's
similar,
also made on this. I mean, like, again, it's not done, right? They will have to do it, but like, they made the decision on the same day. Like, maybe the Mavs move this along, but it does make you wonder, how much did the timeline then factor in if you were able to figure out that, hey, 3 for 10 or 3 for 10 a year is going to work for me, right? Like, that's okay. Huh. Interesting.
So the Clippers pivot from Paul George to Derrick Jones Jr.
I mean, basically the same player, right?
I think the Mavs made a good pivot to do this, to not let it, to not let it wait and all that kind of stuff. It does seem weird now that it's the same amount of money, because you'd think that Derrick Jones Jr. would try to go out and get more money, and doesn't really get a ton more money than Naji Marshall got overall. Very similar money to that. Interesting. But let's talk about what Naji Marshall brings to the Dallas Mavericks. Let's talk about it because I talked to Jake Madison of Locked On Pelicans, and I don't use this word often. Y'all are going to love Naji Marshall.
Ooh.
You're going to love Naji Marshall. He's going to be awesome on this team. I'm very excited for it. Let's talk about that and more coming up.
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
Is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook has all kinds of props and odds that you can use to get in on the action. And go check out what they have available for you. Go check out and see what they have for WNBA, for the NBA, all that kind of stuff in the summer. FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, all summer long. Go check out FanDuel.com/lockedon to make the most out of your summer. They've got the NBA odds right now. The Mavs to win the West are plus 490. You get the Thunder plus 410, Timberwolves plus 410, and Nuggets plus 350. Nuggets still number one to win the West is interesting. Suns plus 1200, Warriors plus 2100, Grizzlies plus 2100. That one's an interesting one. That's a long bet right there. Go check it out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us on Locked On Mavs, being part of the show, part of the Raccoon Squad, listening every day. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out the show. We have just found out that Derrick Jones Jr. is signing with the Clippers for 3 years, $30 million. The Mavs signed Naji Marshall for 3 years, $27 million. So literally $1 million less a year to bring in Naji Marshall instead of Derrick Jones Jr. Very, very interesting. But here's what Naji Marshall is going to bring to the table for the Dallas Mavericks. He's 26 years old, so he's a little younger than Derrick Jones Jr. He's 6'7". He's 6'7", 7-foot wingspan. He has played the last 4 years with the Pelicans. He shot 38.7% on 2.5 threes last year per game, which is the best of his career. He has not shot that well at all until this past year. He shot really well. Pure hustle. What Jake Madison from Locked On Pelicans called him chaotic good. Like he's one of those where he's just all over the place, doing stuff, but doing good stuff. Grabs rebounds he has no business getting. He's always getting in the fast break, and he's really great in the fast break. He's not going to bring the same kind of athleticism that Derrick Jones Jr. brought, but he's a guy that knows exactly like where to be in the fast break and get out there and all that. He also said that he'll fight anyone you want him to fight.
Ooh.
He got ejected earlier this year for fighting with Jimmy Butler earlier in the year, and a lot of Pelicans fans online are saying you'll never have to worry about anyone touching Luka ever again. with Naji Marshall.
That's not nothing, right? Like there have been times where people have clamored for put Markeith in because the Morris boys, they be doing it like that's not nothing. That might be worth something here.
And there was one of the greatest quotes that I've heard from an NBA coach about a player is Willie Green was asked about Larry Nance, and then he was asked about Naji Marshall. He said, if Larry Nance is a Swiss Army knife, like he's a versatile type player, Naji Marshall is just a knife because he just cuts through and he's just like a brutal type player. And so the Pelicans fans and people and even Pelican social media started calling him Knife and started using like the knife emoji for him because he's just a knife. He just cuts through what the other team's trying to do. Defensively, he's very annoying to be defended by. I don't think he's good of a point of attack defender, but he's stronger and bigger than Derrick Jones Jr. And so you've got that as well. I like the Naji Marshall pickup. I think it's a good pickup for the Mavericks, and I think that it's good to add him to that wing room.
Yeah. And he does some of the things that Derrick Jones Jr. does. Well, Derrick Jones Jr. just springs. Like you're not getting that out of Naji Marshall. But one of the things that I did like going through and watching some of his video to get a better idea of some of the things that he does, he can do a little bit more pass, moving the ball around to his teammates. I'm not saying that he's a playmaker that you put the ball in his hands, but when he does have the ball, he seems to find his teammates kind of nicely. And he drives decent. Like he's not knifing down into the paint quite as easily, but he holds his own. He can kind of attack and re-attack if he needs to. And I think that like those things are things that you looked at this Mavericks roster at times in the playoffs and you were like, man, I wish we could turn that up a smidge if we had like kind of a knob. And he seems to have kind of that smidge of a knob turn on some of those things. So yeah, no, I really like it as well. Because I mean, again, some of the bare things that we're talking about, knocking down shots, defensive possibility, he has those. He definitely has them.
Yeah, the shooting ability has been proven. You look at, catch and shoot last year from Naji Marshall, 40% on 158 attempts. Derrick Jones Jr., 35% on 295 attempts. And that was just this last year, and that was Derrick Jones Jr. with Luka. But if you look at their three-point attempts compared the 2 years before they joined the Mavericks, Derrick Jones Jr. on the Bulls, 33% on 140 attempts. So just 140, not a lot. Didn't take a ton of threes. Naji Marshall, 34% on 368 threes. So just in terms of volume, like Naji Marshall was playing a bigger role on the Pelicans the last couple of years than Derrick Jones Jr. played on the Bulls the 2 years before he joined the Mavericks. I think part of this bet and this pivot for the Mavericks to just go and get the guy that was less complicated, to bring in the guy that was a little cheaper, a little younger, a little bigger, a little bit of a better shooter, to go get that guy. Like that, bringing like Derrick Jones Jr. was an unknown quantity coming to the Mavericks. That's why he signed for $2 million with the Mavericks last year. And so signing Naji Marshall to this deal is kind of like, let's try the Derrick Jones Jr. thing again. We know that we can bring any wing into this situation. He's a dirty work wing. He fits that mold. When I talked about the Mavs are going to go for the Klay Thompson thing and do all that, we'll talk about that in a minute. They've got to stick with the dirty work wings because that's what works. Naji Marshall fits that to a T and like could absolutely be a dirty work wing.
Yeah, for sure. And look, it's something that we've talked about a lot on air at the station is the idea of the Luka bump. That is something that you can kind of count on. So you could take whatever stats of a player coming in and you hope that with Luka and the way that he draws attention, and obviously Kyrie to a different degree as well, with the ways that this offense works, that it only makes it easier for those guys to get theirs offensively. And then defensively, you've got to give a lot of credit to Jason Kidd. And hey, shout out to Sean Sweeney. I know that he probably would have enjoyed to get a head coaching job, but he remains, and he clearly matters in upping defensive aptitude of guys, or at least drawing out the maximum of them. So like there is a reason to believe in the aptitude and the ability of this team and this coaching staff to draw the best out of a player. And so, like you said, I think you made a great point. He has a baseline that is already nice. What more do you get out of them that then makes it even more tenable and drives his value above the contract that you sign him for?
That's the thing. I think they're going to make Naji Marshall better than what he was before. And he's coming in at a better spot than what Derrick Jones Jr. came in at. Now, the Mavs do have one issue now. With Derrick Jones Jr. gone for sure. And I was all ready to make can the Mavs keep Derrick Jones Jr. because of the agent thing? Does it make it so complicated that nobody signs him and then they just get, that would have been great. Can't do that play. Sure. Can't do that anymore. Can't do that one anymore. But the Mavs do now have this issue of point of attack defense. We talked all playoffs that they need to improve their point of attack defense. They just lost their best point of attack defender. Naji Marshall is a bigger guy. He can defend wings. He can defend guards. He can do some of that kind of stuff. And maybe he's better than I expect him to be. But I don't think he's as good as Derrick Jones Jr. Quentin Grimes is coming in and he can do some of that stuff and he can defend. And he's been a very good defender. So maybe he comes in and fills some of that role. But I don't know that he's as good as what Derrick Jones Jr. was. And so now all of a sudden, you're taking a step back in a category where you were already kind of weak and needed to be better to be an elite team, like to be an elite playoff finals team and all that. I think between Quentin Grimes, Naji Marshall, Dante Exum, Josh Green, those are your four like point of attack defenders. And you can like cobble together enough minutes in the regular season to get away with that. Like that can be fine. But come playoff time, like who's the guy? Who's that guy that can defend in that spot? And let's also be clear about Derrick Jones Jr. He didn't qualify for all defensive team voting because Kidd didn't play him enough in the regular season. Didn't play him 20 minutes a game enough times. It's not like the Mavs are losing Derrick Jones Jr., who is this, he came in and was just this incredible defender, played 30 minutes a game. He did in the playoffs. He eventually got there. But all through the regular season, like it took to a point where the Mavs made trades and did all this kind of stuff too. And Tim Hardaway fell out of the rotation for Jason Kidd to be like, all right, we've got to go with Derrick Jones Jr. here. So to me, it's not like the Mavericks are losing an all-world defender and getting a trash defender. It's a little bit closer in the middle.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned Josh Green was one of the immediate ones I thought of. When Nico Harrison talking about how he built this roster for 3 playoff runs, right? Like something that's intrinsic to that is you have a lot of youth and you have to, in some ways, anticipate a level of growth. And I imagine that like if you need a speedier perimeter defender, you're looking at Josh Green like, hey, this is where we need you to take that half step or that step or whatever, so that if we need that in a particular situation, you're the guy to provide that. If we need a little bit more stout perimeter defender, That's when you go with Naji Marshall, or hell, maybe you go get a dude who has been an all defensive guy. Maybe you get a guy who has been an elite perimeter defender, and maybe not exactly that same elite defender, but a very good one. And I imagine that might lead us into our next conversation, Nick.
Absolutely. Josh Green may not be on this team anymore like by the time you listen to this. So let's talk about the Klay Thompson move. Let's talk about that being the Mavs' big thing. Does that help the Mavericks in point of attack? Why are the Mavericks going after Klay Thompson? Is it the right move? Where are they in it? We'll talk about all that and more coming up.
You don't believe you shouldn't be here.
Shut it down! Let's go home!
All right, Reggie, we've been talking about Naji Marshall. I think it was a good pivot for the Dallas Mavericks. The signing happened literally in the middle of the podcast as we were recording it. And so it is a very weird thing right now that we'll have to figure out over the next couple of days. But with Klay Thompson, that seems to be the next move for the Dallas Mavericks. That's the thing that they're really going after in Klay Thompson. Haven't heard your opinion yet on it. What do you think about Klay Thompson being like this number one? We're going after him. He's the guy that can solve some of our issues.
Well, I mean, look, I think if you came into this offseason with the Mavericks and you were told the roster will be pretty much the same, you go run it back. I think a lot of people are comfortable with that. The team had only really been together for a couple of months as you look at the trade deadline, and there was a level of growth. However, Klay Thompson absolutely represents an opportunity to, when you go Luka, Kyrie, who is that third guy? When we talk about a third scorer, someone who can be consistent, right? Not where you have to search and say who is going to step up and be the third scorer for the night. You have that. And then also, again, we just highlighted in that last segment the idea of having a bona fide, when we have a perimeter challenge defensively, Klay Thompson exists as that guy. And I think the only thing that you then ask is, we know that he is on the backside of his hill of his prime. What is the degradation like? Because he's no longer the elite version of that, but is he still just is he the very good version of that? Is he the just good version of that? And how does that track over the time period? But right now, and we've seen it, right? Like, I think we're looking at a Denver Nuggets team right now that, even no matter what the odds say, you're looking at this offseason, you go, oh wow, did that window shut? Like, these things happen very quickly. And so maximizing the now, when you have Kyrie, when you have Luka, and you have the team in a certain way, I think the priority is that in the next couple of seasons. And I imagine that, especially if you look at this organization, they'll look at it as Klay Thompson, whatever the degradation is, you get at least 2 good seasons out of them. And you get those questions answered that we were asking in the postseason, that we were asking in the finals, in a third guy who is absolutely there, who is going to knock down threes, and who is not like a maybe, but is more of an absolute, and a dude who you go, we trust his defense. We trust his defensive IQ, right, to help organize along with Derek Lively. I think all of those things matter in a big way.
Matters in a big way. The defense is the big question. I think the offense answers some of the questions where you're like, all right, how is he going to make up for some of the deficiencies and some of the things that they were like, oh, really? Like, he doesn't solve some of the problems we talked about. All the stuff we talked about, point of attack. He used to solve that problem for a team. He does not anymore. He's not necessarily a liability, but he's not great in that area anymore. But his three-point shooting, all playoffs long, we were waiting for some guy to step up and to hit a dang three. The Mavs needed to take a step forward on offense, find a third scorer. This is it. Remember all playoffs, and through the end of the year, we were like, man, the Mavs just need one more scorer. And Tim Hardaway Jr. not being that guy and not being able to step up in those areas, not being able to play, not being able to hit threes consistently enough, not being able to hit threes off of movement, not being able to call plays up for him to take pressure off of Luka and Kyrie, not being able to do all those things. It would have been amazing if he could. And I think the Mavs would have had a better time against the Celtics if he could have, because they just needed that extra offensive guy. That's Klay Thompson now. Imagine like those wide open threes that went to Tim Hardaway, went to Derrick Jones Jr., went to PJ Washington. Some of those will go to Klay Thompson now. And the spacing with Klay Thompson, he's going to get much more respected as a three-point shooter than Derrick Jones Jr. did, which is why he got a whole bunch of open threes, than PJ Washington, which is why he got a whole bunch of open threes. And if you have that guy, Klay Thompson as the three-point shooter out on the wing, that's going to give you much more space, respect, and obviously knock down the threes that he's going to get. And it opens your playbook up that you can run a bunch of plays for him to run off of screens and do kind of stuff like that. part of the reason why the Mavericks like offensive playbook has been so limited and we've been so frustrated about it is because they didn't have the personnel to do some of this stuff. Now if you get Klay Thompson, you have one of those guys that can be somebody that you draw up a play where he runs around screens or comes up elevators or whatever you decide to do with him.
Right.
He could do. And so like that, he answers some of those questions. He doesn't answer your defensive issues, but the Mavs were good defensively last year. You get Naji Marshall, maybe he replaces like 85% of Derrick Jones Jr.'s defense. Quentin Grimes, I think that he comes in. I think he's a better defender than Josh Green, and so that helps you a little bit too. Tim Hardaway is gone, so that helps you. That helps you on defense, I think, a little bit. And you get the team together a little bit longer. Derek Lively, like they can take a slight step forward defensively, but if they get Klay Thompson, their offense is going to be much better.
Yeah, man, the offense obviously needing to be better. Yeah, that is the thing that I've thought about defensively, as you mentioned. That's the thing that I've thought about a lot with Klay Thompson, and that's why I use that word degradation. Like that's been the thing that's stuck in there is what does that look like? Because we've already seen that step down from what he was prior. And I think some of it also always matters with the context. I talk about this a lot because, I mean, Dwight Powell is a great kind of test case in this. When Dwight Powell is making $11 million, the context of that means that we need him to do more. When Dwight Powell is making $4 million, assuming that we're being rational, like it's a lot easier for you to understand and appreciate like what he is because he's in the right context. Klay Thompson making $43 million last year. That's not tenable for what you're trying to do if you're the Golden State Warriors. Yeah. And so I think that it depends on what that contract looks like as well and what that ultimately takes away from you as a Dallas Mavericks. But you're right. Offense is there. Defense, I really do have questions as to like what it continues to look like. And if from one year to the next, especially with coming off of all those injuries, if like, let's say it's a 4-year deal, what does year 3 and 4 look like as if we've already seen that level of degradation? But again, I think this is more of a deal that you say this is for the first couple of years, and hopefully you can continue to draw out the best of that. And of course, as you mentioned, a lot of this is on the offensive end. You have a lot of other youth that you imagine that you hope can kind of cover that. But that is a legitimate concern for me, is that you already have the Luka and Kyrie situation defensively, adding another guy. And I understand I'm doing a lot here when I'm like adding another guy who you have to consider when you talk about defense. But like, no, if depending on what that degradation is, that's the thing I worry about. But hey, that's when I go to Jason Kidd and Sean Sweeney. Like, what can you guys do to make all of these things fit together? Because what you're getting on the offensive end matters a whole bunch.
That's the key point to me. Is there's a lot of people like, oh, well, you can't play Luka, Kyrie, and Klay and close games with them. Well, you bring in the personnel, and Jason Kidd figures it out. That's the whole point of the coach, is to figure out who's got to play in what scenarios, and when do you need the better point of attack defender, when do you need the better shooting, when do you need this, and when do you need that. Give him options, and then he is the coach that has to figure that out and figure out the ego. Klay's not going to come off the bench. What if Klay doesn't close games, and what if the kid, the coach has got to figure that out and figure out how to like manage those egos and things like that, and it comes down to them. But at least you're giving him the option to open up the playbook, to add another 3-point shooter, to add a smart defender that can come in and play that role. And the Mavs defensive scheme is built so that you don't have to be a great defender in your role. If you don't have to be a great defender just at your one-on-one on an island. You have to be good in the scheme and have to work together and have to show up and work. And so I think that Klay Thompson would absolutely be a guy that would do that. So it's an interesting spot to be in. It's an interesting bet for the Mavericks. They're up against the Lakers right now. I am nervous about the Lakers side of it because Michael Thompson, his dad, is the color commentator for the Lakers, beloved, longtime TV guy for them. He played for the Lakers. Klay grew up around there and grew up in LA. He's a California guy. He likes his boat. He likes his dog. He likes to go out on his boat, and
he loves his boat hat.
Yeah, he loves all that stuff, and I don't think he's getting it in Dallas necessarily the same way he would. But the Mavs just went to the finals, and they've got a better opportunity for him to win and to try something else.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things for me that fuels some of the concern about the Lakers thing is, what was the reported or purported reason why he wanted to leave the Warriors? It was the idea of wanting to be respected or valued. According to reports, Adrian Wojnarowski put out there that LeBron James went and called him, man to man to try and get him down there. Like having LeBron James get on the phone and tell you, I need you here, right? Like that feels like being valued and wanted. And so that's one of the things where I go, ooh, right? Is that what he is looking for? And is that being delivered in that particular kind of, being sought after? However, I think that you're right. Like, this is probably a better situation that you could look at on paper for sure. And tell me if you think I'm wrong here. It feels like a situation that if the Mavs got him, it is a little bit of raising the ceiling, but potentially opening up the possibility of a lower floor.
Yeah, if Klay doesn't work out and all of a sudden his defense is detrimental, then it's Luka, Kyrie, Klay, and you go, oh my God. And then they lose Derrick Jones Jr. And what if Naji Marshall isn't better? What if Quentin Grimes isn't better? Like, yeah, there's a lot of what ifs now. There's a lot of things that you have to test and see if it works and all that, but that's why you have the regular season. That's why you try it all out. So yeah, the floor could bottom out a little bit if the offense, or the defense gets worse, because that's the thing that made them really good. And so we'll see all that. But yeah, I'm fascinated to see how it works out. I think that it was a good pivot for the Mavericks. We'll see what happens with Klay Thompson. We'll continue to have shows. Go listen to Reggie on 105.3 The Fan. Guys, thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs. We'll be back. I did a 3-hour live stream today. None of the Mavs stuff happened during it.
Peace out.
Boom.